Hussein believes he has earned his new apartment in Istanbul, having worked hard for it for 30 years in Germany. Now he can finally retire and start a new life in Turkey. But Hussein collapses after a heart attack, and the family meets not to celebrate the new home, but to bury the head of the family. This catastrophe sets the stage for Fatma Aydemir's novel, which chronicles the life of Hussein and Emine, Turkish Kurds who wanted to build a new life in Germany, especially for their children. But a sense of reproach is ever present.
We want to see you have a better life, they say. But then there's a lot of scope to disappoint the parents.
In her novel Jinns, we get to know Hussein and his wife Emine, their children Sevda, Hakan, Peri, and Umit. Them and their jinns, their spirits.
These spirits are often simply secrets that these characters have, that they carry with them and within the family. They represent traumas that they've never worked through.
For Hussein, it was poverty and violence in Turkey. For Emine, it was the loss of her first child. For Sevda, married off at just 18, it's fighting for her independence against all odds. Hakan, who works for a used car dealer, peddling fast cars, asks whether it's possible to have a life that's different than his father's. Umit, the youngest, loves to play soccer and falls in love with a friend. It almost breaks him. And then there's Peri, the rebellious one, who studies in Frankfurt and who's angry about everything.
Assimilation, Peri thought, simply had no history. It was the opposite of history. It was history's end, its extinction.
Fatma Aydemir describes Germany as an unfriendly place where everyone is afraid to speak the truth, because the truth can sometimes be an imposition. The story takes place out in the countryside, in a village on the Kiel Canal, with lots of greenery and a view of container ships heading out to sea. And in the nearby town, there are many empty business lots. There's room for something new here. Think Julia and Astrid, the main characters in Kristine Bilkau's novel Nebenan, or Next Door. Julia, in her late 30s, is racked by self-doubt.
The question of whether you feel safe or secure somewhere doesn't depend on place, but on relationships.
Julia is trying to have a child in vain. As if to punish herself, she spends hours looking at Instagram accounts of supermoms or those who aspire to be. Here, the world is still intact.
Everything here is driven by longing for a world without ruptures. But no one here will fulfill her longings. On the contrary, these longings are a commodity, traded and exploited. Her longings are like raw material which sustains others, but she will find nothing here that lasts.
Astrid is a doctor going on 60 and considers herself happy. Her husband is retired and her children are grown up. But when she's confronted with a suspicious death during a nighttime house call, her self-image is shaken to its core.
Has her understanding of people been deep and critical enough? She's actually always been a very self-assured woman, and that all starts to fall apart a bit.
How do we live, and with whom? And what's actually going on with the neighboring family that disappears out of the blue? Astrid and Julia, each of them has her own thoughts, but their encounter remains fleeting. The novel tells us that home can be a fragile place, and that it doesn't matter where, but how we live.
Life in a nuclear family, as seen through the eyes of a little girl. Daniela Dröscher's novel, Lies About My Mother, is a tragicomedy that plays out in the homes, gardens and kitchens of the German middle class.
Who has the power, and to which powers, social mechanisms and dynamics are the individual characters subjected to in this intimate theatre we call family? My mother won't fit in any coffin. She's too fat, she says. When she dies, she doesn't want her ashes to be kept in an urn. but simply scattered over open water. The father has climbed the social ladder, and for an upstart like him, things like appearance and not standing out are very important. It's the armor he needs to exist in this new world, and the mother doesn't fit the bill.
The novel takes the reader back in time to West Germany in the early 80s, the era of tennis legend Boris Becker, Chancellor Helmut Kohl, and the Cold War. A time of rigid gender roles. What was it like to come of age during those years, having a father who controls and rules over your mother, who sees her body as an unsightly stain on his immaculate facade?
Just look at yourself. From now on, she had to weigh herself every morning, under his supervision. Every time the humiliation could be seen flashing across her face.
Daniela Dröscher's novel is the portrait of a generation and a declaration of love to a mother who refuses to remain a victim and eventually manages to set herself free.
Large parts of his latest book came to German-Czech author Jan Faktor while riding around on his bike. Since it's an autobiographical novel, the title Trottel, or Idiot, affectionately refers to the author himself.
Well, he's not a complete moron, but he blunders along and allows himself to come up with countless idiotic ideas and pointless musings. For him, anything goes.
Ghosts of his past appear to the cheerful idiot in the shape of European history, personal memories, and entertaining digressions.
If only I knew what deserves telling from the porous pile that is my past.
He arrives to East Berlin in 1978. Drawn to the morbid charm and anarchistic mood fueled by intellectuals and artists in the Prenzlauer Berg district, he tells tales of free love in squatted apartments.
The decay suited me, and socialism didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. Everything was ugly and falling apart, and so was society. It was symptomatic. Somehow, it was like a huge playground. I'm perpetually in a good mood nowadays, although I don't much like myself when I unexpectedly catch my reflection in a mirror.
But underneath all the lightness is a tragic undertow.
Death makes an appearance on the very first page. It's always present, lurking beneath the surface, never denied.
Playfulness is overshadowed by the spectre of sorrow and death. Jan Faktor's son lived in this Berlin courtyard until he committed suicide in 2012. The novel also serves as a monument to the lost son. What happens if a person doesn't feel at home in their own body? How do you find a language for a body that feels neither male nor female? Kim de l'Horizon spent more than 10 years writing this haunting debut novel.
I wanted to tell you about my constant fear of my own body, what it's like to share the blanket in my bed with the most terrifying monster. Only it's not a blanket, it's my skin.
Blutbuch, or The Book of Blood, tells of a childhood spent in fear, in a middle-class family in Swiss suburbia. The non-binary narrator named Kim has left all of that behind. When their grandmother develops dementia, Kim questions the family history. What traumas did their mother and grandmother experience? And why the silence?
Why are so many things suppressed in our culture? Because it's painful to name the things that we have only partially processed or not processed at all. I think it's very much about pain, and in general, about being able to feel yourself.
Kim de l'Horizon weaves many narrative layers around the family story, giving each its own language. the mother's callousness, outrageous sex dates, contemplation of nature and criticism of the patriarchy. Writing becomes an almost magical process.
Writing is really like life itself, terrible and beautiful and everything in between. It's an opportunity to heal, but it can also open fresh wounds. So we have to think carefully about which sentences we utter and which ones we keep inside. I never cared much for art. I found most of the pictures I got to see either unsightly or meaningless, sometimes both at the same time.
These are some of the narrator's opening words in Eckhart Nickel's novel Spitzweg. They turn out to be misleading because the book does in fact celebrate art, painting and the artist who gives the book its title.
Spitzweg has been one of the greatest discoveries of painting for me. There's so much to explore in these works. And because I've always wanted to be a bit of a detective, I've discovered a lot more in these paintings than is immediately visible.
Quirky bachelors, bookworms. The novel features characters straight out of the Spitzweg universe. It all begins with a self-portrait made in art class of students about to graduate from high school. What follows? An insult, an art heist, and a plan for revenge, complete with a showdown in a museum. Eckhart Nickel's characters go on a scavenger hunt, in which art becomes a source of inspiration, a mirror of the soul and a teacher.
Of course, one could say that the book is about what art can be for people and how art can also help people master their lives. Because art always reminds you that life is also full of beauty. And I think that's one of the great potentials of art.
Spitzweg is a coming-of-age story, a novel about school and friendship. But above all, it champions art's ability to guide a person through life.